The massive doors of the Valdorian palace opened with a soft hiss, revealing halls that sparkled like captured starlight. Jake Martinez kept his face calm as he walked through the entrance, his military boots clicking against floors made of polished crystal that cost more than entire planets. 3 years as a prisoner had taught him to hide his thoughts well. Lady Zephyra watched from her floating platform as the human was brought before her. She was tall and elegant, with pale blue skin that seemed to glow in the light. Her eyes were large and silver, studying Jake like he was some interesting puzzle she wanted to solve. Expensive jewelry covered her arms and neck, each piece worth more than most star systems. "So this is my new bodyguard," she said, her voice carrying the musical tone all Valdorians had. "The human they say cannot be broken." Jake stood straight and gave a respectful nod. "Ma'am, Sergeant Jake Martinez reporting for duty." Zephyra smiled, showing teeth like perfect pearls. "Sergeant, you still use your old rank? How curious." She gestured with one long finger. "Come, let me show you what you will be protecting." They moved through the palace, and Jake tried not to stare too obviously at the incredible wealth around him. Every wall held art stolen from conquered worlds. Rare gems the size of his fist sat casually on tables like decorations. Weapons that could destroy cities hung like trophies in glass cases. But Jake wasn't looking at the treasures the way Zephyra expected. His eyes moved differently, checking corners and shadows, noting exits and potential hiding spots. He was mapping the palace, like a soldier, not admiring it like a tourist. "That painting," Zephyra said, pointing to a massive canvas that seemed to move and shift colors, "is from the Kellian homeworld. It took our armies 2 years to conquer their planet just to obtain it." Jake glanced at the painting politely. "It's very nice, ma'am. Is that window behind it reinforced?" Zephyra blinked, surprised. "The window? Why would you care about that?" "Security, ma'am. Someone could use it to get inside or to take a shot from outside." "Ah." Zephyra studied him more carefully. "You think like a protector, not like someone who wants what he sees." They continued the tour. Jake was shown rooms filled with technology beyond anything humans had ever dreamed of. Machines that could create matter from nothing. Computers that could think faster than entire civilizations. Devices that could extend life for thousands of years. Each time Jake asked practical questions. How many people had access? Were there security cameras? What were the weak points someone might exploit? "Tell me, Jake Martinez," Zephyra said as they reached her private quarters. "Do you not want any of these things? Other guards I have owned become obsessed. They stare at my treasures with such hunger it amuses me." Jake thought carefully before answering. "They're impressive, ma'am. But wanting things I can't have just makes life harder." "Cannot have? But what if I offered them to you? Then I'd wonder what you wanted in return." Zephyra laughed, a sound like wind chimes. "Clever. But humans are supposed to be greedy creatures. Your species fights wars over resources, does it not?" "We fight wars over a lot of things," Jake said quietly. "Sometimes resources, sometimes because we have to." That evening, Zephyra sat in her chambers thinking about her new guard. She had owned dozens of bodyguards from different species over the years. The strong ones always wanted power. The smart ones always wanted knowledge. The desperate ones always wanted freedom. But this human seemed to want nothing at all. She called for her advisor, an elderly Valdorian named Nex who had served her family for decades. "What do you think of the human?" she asked. Nex made a dismissive gesture. "Primitive, as expected. But the reports say he fights well. The slave traders claim he killed 6 Krogan warriors bare-handed during his capture." "Yes, but did you see how he looked at my treasures?" "With appropriate awe, I assume?" "No. He barely noticed them. He was more interested in the doors and windows." Nex frowned. "Perhaps he is defective? Some slaves become broken in ways that make them unable to feel desire." "I don't think he's broken," Zephyra said slowly. "When I spoke of his rank, his eyes showed pride. When I mentioned his homeworld, I saw sadness. He feels things. He just doesn't seem to want my possessions." Impossible. Every intelligent species desires wealth and power. Zephyra wasn't so sure. She had studied many species during her education, but humans were still new to the galactic community. Most of what they knew came from interrogating prisoners and studying their wars. Perhaps there were things about them that weren't understood yet. The next morning, Jake began his duties. Zephyra watched him work and was impressed despite herself. He moved through the palace like he had memorized every corner overnight. He positioned himself perfectly to watch for threats while staying out of her way. When servants approached, he studied their faces and body language before letting them get close. When visitors arrived, he somehow knew which ones were dangerous before her security scanners did. "How did you know Ambassador Krell was carrying a weapon?" Zephyra asked after Jake had politely but firmly insisted the visitor be searched. "The way he walked, ma'am. People move differently when they're carrying something they're not supposed to have. Our sensors detected nothing. Sensors can't see everything." Zephyra realized that Jake's mind worked in ways her technology couldn't match. He saw patterns and details that escaped even her advanced systems. It was like he understood something about behavior and danger that her species had never learned. That night she made a decision. Tomorrow she would begin testing her human guard properly. She wanted to understand what made him different from every other creature she had ever met. She had heard rumors about human prisoners who couldn't be bribed or corrupted no matter what they were offered. Other nobles claimed it was impossible, that every being had a price. But looking at Jake Martinez, Zephyra began to wonder if humans might be something entirely new in the galaxy, something that couldn't be bought, owned, or controlled in the ways her people were used to. And that thought both excited and worried her more than she wanted to admit. Jake, meanwhile, stood guard outside her door, thinking about home and wondering if he would ever see Earth again. He had learned not to hope for things beyond his control. The Valdorians could offer him anything they wanted, but they couldn't give him back the life he had lost. And until they could do that, everything else was just shiny objects that meant nothing at all. The next morning, Lady Zephyra waited until after breakfast to put her plan into action. She had spent half the night thinking about her human guard and his strange behavior. Every other species she had dealt with showed predictable patterns when faced with wealth. They either wanted it desperately or had been conditioned not to care about anything at all. But Jake Martinez was different. He seemed alert and aware, yet completely uninterested in her treasures. Today, she would find out why. "Jake," she called as he stood at his usual post by the window. "Come with me. I want to show you something special." Jake followed her through corridors he was already learning by heart. They passed servants and minor nobles who bowed low when they saw Zephyra. Jake noticed how some of them looked at the lady's jewelry with barely hidden desire, while others seemed afraid to even glance at her. They reached a door Jake hadn't seen before, hidden behind a section of wall that looked like decoration. Zephyra placed her hand on a scanner, and the door slid open with a soft sound. "My private treasury," she said, gesturing for him to enter. The room beyond took Jake's breath away, though he tried not to show it. It was larger than most buildings he had known on Earth, with a ceiling so high it disappeared into darkness. Display cases lined the walls, each one holding items that seemed to glow with their own light. "This collection represents thousands of years of Valdorian conquest," Zephyra said, watching Jake's face carefully. "Items gathered from every corner of the galaxy." She led him to the first display case. Inside sat a crown that seemed to be made of liquid silver and starlight. "This is the neural crown of Asterix Prime. It can increase intelligence by 10 times, letting the wearer understand sciences and mathematics beyond normal comprehension." Jake studied it professionally. "Does it work on humans?" "It works on any species with a developed brain." "What are the side effects?" Zephyra paused. Most people asked how they could get it, not what problems it might cause. "Some. Personality changes. The wearer often becomes cold and calculating." Jake nodded. "So it makes you smarter but changes who you are?" "In a way, yes." They moved to the next case, which held gems that pulsed with different colors. "These are quantum diamonds," Zephyra explained. "Each one contains enough energy to power a small planet for a century. 3 of them could buy you an entire star system." Jake leaned closer, but not with greed. He was checking the security around the case. Are they dangerous if they break? They would explode with the force of a nuclear weapon. Then why keep them here instead of in a safer place? Again, Zephyra was surprised. Because they are beautiful and valuable. But if someone wanted to hurt you, they could break one of these and destroy the whole palace. Zephyra had never thought of her treasures as potential weapons against her. It was an unsettling idea. They continued through the treasury. Jake was shown weapons that could cut through any material, devices that could control minds, and artifacts that granted their users incredible powers. Each time he asked about function, safety, and security, rather than showing any desire to possess them. Finally, they reached the center of the room where the most valuable items were kept. Zephyra stopped in front of a case that held dozens of small objects. Choose, she said suddenly. Jake looked at her, confused. Ma'am? Choose any item from my entire treasury. Consider it a bonus for your service. Whatever you want is yours. Jake stared at her for a long moment. Around them, treasures worth more than entire civilizations glittered in the soft light. Some could give him power beyond imagination. Others could extend his life for thousands of years. Many could buy him freedom and passage back to Earth. He walked slowly around the room, examining different cases. Zephyra followed, certain he would choose one of the most valuable pieces. Perhaps the neural crown, which could make him as intelligent as any Valdorian. Or maybe the quantum diamonds, which represented more wealth than most beings could comprehend. Instead, Jake stopped at a small case in a corner that held what looked like junk. Bits of metal, broken electronics, and other odds and ends that Zephyra had collected more as curiosities than treasures. This one, Jake said, pointing to a simple metal pendant hanging on a rough chain. Zephyra stared at him. That? But it's worthless. I obtained it from another human prisoner months ago. It's just scrap metal beaten into shape. I know what it is, Jake said quietly. My friend Danny made it during our time in the prison camps. He gave it to me before. Jake's voice got softer. Before he died, Zephyra felt a strange emotion she couldn't name. But you could have anything. Items worth entire planets. This is worth more than all of them put together. How? It has no power, no monetary value, no practical use. Jake picked up the pendant when she opened the case. His hands were gentle as he hung it around his neck. It reminds me who I am, and who I'm fighting for. Fighting for? You're a slave. You fight for me now. Jake looked at her with eyes that held no anger but no submission either. With respect, ma'am, you can own my time and my service. But you can't own what I fight for. Zephyra felt frustrated and confused. She had expected him to choose wealth or power. She had been prepared for greed or ambition, but this quiet dignity was something she had never encountered before. I don't understand you, she said. That's okay, Jake replied. Most people don't understand each other very well. They walked back through the palace in silence. Zephyra's mind was spinning with questions she couldn't answer. How could someone choose a worthless trinket over items that could change his entire life? How could he seem so content with so little when surrounded by so much? That evening, she called for her advisor again. The human chose a piece of scrap metal, she told Nex. When offered anything in my treasury, he chose garbage. Nex shook his head. Clearly defective. Shall I arrange for a replacement? No, Zephyra said quickly. No, I want to understand this. How can someone be so indifferent to wealth? Perhaps humans simply cannot comprehend value the way civilized species do. But Zephyra didn't think that was right. Jake had understood the value of everything she showed him. He had asked intelligent questions about each item. He knew exactly what he was turning down. He just didn't want it. And for the first time in her life, Lady Zephyra encountered something she couldn't buy, trade for, or take by force. She had met a person who couldn't be corrupted by wealth or power, and she had no idea how to handle that. Jake, meanwhile, sat in his small quarters touching the pendant and thinking about Danny, who had died believing that some things were worth more than survival. Looking at the metal his friend had shaped with his own hands, Jake remembered why he had chosen to become a soldier in the first place. Some things couldn't be bought or sold, and he intended to keep it that way. Over the next several weeks, Lady Zephyra became obsessed with understanding her human guard. Jake's choice of the worthless pendant over priceless treasures haunted her thoughts. She decided to conduct more tests, each one designed to find his breaking point. The first test came during a routine patrol of the palace gardens. Zephyra arranged for one of her trusted servants, Kix, to approach Jake privately. "Guard," Kix whispered, when Zephyra was pretending to examine some rare flowers. "I have a proposition for you." Jake kept his eyes on the surroundings, watching for threats. "I'm listening." "There is a small transport leaving for the Outer Rim tonight. For the right price, they would take a passenger. No questions asked." "What's the price?" Kix pulled out a small device. "Just a recording of Lady Zephyra's daily schedule. Nothing that would hurt her. Just information some traders would pay well for." Jake was quiet for a moment. Then he turned and looked directly at Kix. "No. But you could be free. Back to human space in a month." I said no. Kix pressed harder. "Think about it. You're a slave here. You'll never see your home again unless you take chances like this." "My answer won't change," Jake said calmly. "And if you ask me again, I'll report this conversation to Lady Zephyra." Kix backed away quickly and reported the failure to Zephyra later. She was more puzzled than ever. Jake had been offered freedom, the thing every prisoner supposedly wanted. Most, and he had turned it down without hesitation. The second test came a week later. Zephyra arranged for Jake to overhear a conversation between two visiting nobles about a planned rebellion against the Valdorian government. The information was fake, but valuable enough that selling it could buy him a ship and a new identity. Jake listened to the entire conversation, then continued his duties as if nothing had happened. He never tried to contact anyone about what he had heard, never attempted to profit from the information. He simply filed it away and kept doing his job. The third test was more direct. Zephyra had a chest of rare metals delivered to Jake's quarters with a note saying it was payment for special services. The metals were worth enough to buy a small planet. Jake returned the chest the next morning without opening it. "There's been a mistake," he told her. "This was delivered to my room." "No mistake, it's a gift." "For what?" "For being an excellent bodyguard." Jake shook his head. "I don't need gifts for doing my job." "Everyone needs something," Zephyra insisted. "What is it you want?" "Nothing you can give me." Zephyra felt anger rising in her chest. "I can give you anything: wealth, power, knowledge, freedom. What else is there?" Jake was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "Peace." "Peace? We're not at war." "No, ma'am. Peace inside. The kind that comes from knowing you've done the right thing even when no one was watching." Zephyra stared at him. That's not a real thing. That's just words." "It's the only real thing," Jake replied. Frustrated beyond measure, Zephyra consulted with other Valdorian nobles about her strange human. Most agreed with Nex that Jake was simply defective. "Humans are a primitive species," said Lord Vex during a dinner party. "Their brains probably can't process complex desires like civilized beings." "But he's not stupid," Zephyra argued. "He asks intelligent questions. He notices things our sensors miss." "Then perhaps he's planning something," suggested Lady Nara. "Maybe he's pretending to be incorruptible while secretly plotting against you." That idea worried Zephyra enough that she decided to test Jake's loyalty in a more dangerous way. She arranged for a fake assassination attempt during a state dinner with ambassadors from several worlds. The assassin was actually one of her own guards in disguise, armed with a weapon set to stun rather than kill. He was supposed to get close, enough to seem dangerous before other security stopped him. But Jake reacted faster than anyone expected. The moment the disguised guard reached for his weapon, Jake was moving. He crossed the room in seconds, disarmed the attacker, and had him pinned to the ground before Zephyra's other guards even realized what was happening. "Stay down," Jake said quietly to the struggling assassin. "Don't make me hurt you." The dinner guests were in chaos, some screaming, others trying to flee. But Jake remained calm, controlling the situation until backup arrived. Later, in private, Zephyra asked him how he had known. His heartbeat, Jake said. I could see his pulse in his neck. It was too fast for someone just serving dinner. You can see heartbeats? When you need to. Also, his eyes kept moving to you instead of focusing on his job. Real servants don't stare at their masters. Zephyra realized that Jake's abilities went far beyond anything she had understood. He could read people in ways her technology couldn't match. He saw details that escaped her most advanced sensors, but more than that, when faced with real danger to her life, he had protected her without hesitation. No thought of reward or personal safety. He had simply done what needed to be done. Why? She asked. Why protect me so completely when I'm your captor? Jake considered the question seriously. Because it's my job, and because you're a person. I'm your enemy. No, you're not. You're just someone who's never learned there are things more important than getting what you want. That night, Zephyra lay awake thinking about Jake's words. For the first time in her long life, she began to wonder if there might be something wrong with the way her people saw the universe. Every Valdorian learned from birth that power and wealth were the only things that mattered. That taking what you could and holding on to it was the natural way of life. That other species existed to serve those strong enough to conquer them. But Jake seemed to operate by completely different rules. Rules that made him stronger in ways she was only beginning to understand. The next morning she made a decision. She would stop testing Jake's loyalty and start trying to understand his mind. Because she was starting to suspect that humans possessed something her advanced civilization had lost long ago. Something that might be more valuable than all her treasures combined. Lady Zephyra decided it was time for direct answers. She had tested Jake Martinez in every way she could think of, and he had surprised her each time. Now she needed to understand why he was so different from every other being she had ever met. She waited until they were alone in her private study, a room filled with books and data crystals from across the galaxy. Jake stood at his usual post by the door, alert but relaxed. Jake, she said, not looking up from the reports she was pretending to read. I want you to explain something to me. Yes, ma'am. Why don't you want anything? I have offered you wealth beyond imagination, power over others, knowledge that could make you godlike, and freedom to return to your people. You have rejected everything. Jake was quiet for a moment. Did you ever have something you cared about, more than anything else, and then lose it? The question caught Zephyra off guard. Yes. When I was young, I had a pet, a small creature from my homeworld. It died when I was just learning to rule my first territory. How did that feel? Terrible. I was angry and sad for months. She paused. But what does that have to do with anything? On Earth, we have a saying, you can't lose what you don't have. I learned a long time ago that wanting things I can't. Control just makes life harder. Zephyra set down her reports and looked at him directly. But these are things you could control. I'm offering them to you. Jake shook his head. No, you're not. You're offering to let me borrow them as long as I do what you want. The minute I disappoint you or become inconvenient, you'll take everything back. That's how the universe works, Zephyra said. The strong take from the weak. Maybe for your people, but humans learn something different. What? Jake moved, slightly, still watching the room but focusing more on their conversation. We learned that the strongest person isn't the one who can take the most. It's the one who can't be broken by losing things. That makes no sense. Strength comes from power and resources. Does it? Your empire has the most advanced technology in the galaxy. Your military is the largest, your wealth is beyond measuring. But you couldn't defeat humanity, could you? Zephyra felt a flash of anger. We did defeat you. You're here, aren't you? You overwhelmed us with numbers. That's not the same thing as defeating us. How many of your ships did we destroy? How many of your worlds did we make you fight for, planet by planet? The anger faded, replaced by uncomfortable memory. The war against humanity had been far costlier than anyone expected. These primitive beings with their simple weapons had fought with a determination that shocked the galaxy. We fought back because we had something worth fighting for, Jake continued. Not because we wanted your stuff, but because we wanted to keep what was ours. Your planet, your resources, our families, our friends, our right to choose how to live. Jake's voice got softer. Our freedom to be who we decided to be instead of who someone else wanted us to be. Saphira stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. You're talking about concepts, not real things. They're the most real things there are. Everything else can be taken away, but no one can take away who you choose to be. I could have you tortured until you begged for mercy. I could break your mind with drugs until you forgot your own name. How is that not taking away who you are? Jake was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was steady but sad. My friend Danny, the one who made this pendant, was tortured for 3 days straight. They wanted him to give up the location of our hidden base. Did he tell them? No. He died first. Then he was a fool. He could have lived if he had just told them what they wanted. He could have survived. Jake corrected. That's not the same as living. Saphira turned back to face him. Explain the difference. Living means being someone you can respect when you look in the mirror. Danny knew that if he betrayed his friends to save himself, he wouldn't be Danny anymore. He'd just be some broken thing wearing Danny's face. So he chose death over betraying others? He chose to stay himself no matter what happened to him. Zephyra felt something shift in her mind, like a door opening to a room she had never seen before. And that's why you won't take my gifts? Because it would change who you are? Partly, but also because I don't need them to be happy. How can you be happy as a slave? Jake smiled slightly, the first real smile she had seen from him. I'm not happy about being a slave, but I can be happy about other things. The sunrise through your palace windows is beautiful. The gardens smell nice. Yesterday I saw a bird that reminded me of ones from Earth. Those are tiny things. Tiny things add up to a life, and they can't be bought or sold. Zephyra sank back into her chair, feeling overwhelmed. Everything Jake was saying went against everything she had been taught about how the universe worked. You're telling me that humans fight harder because they care more about ideas than wealth? We fight harder because we know who we are. When someone tries to take that away, we have something real to defend. But ideas can't protect you from weapons. Principles can't stop armies. Can't they? Your armies had better weapons, more ships, superior technology. But you had to kill most of us to stop us. We never surrendered, never gave up. That's because we were fighting for things that mattered more than staying alive. Zephyra thought about the reports from the human war, the incredible casualty rates, the way human soldiers kept fighting even when victory was impossible, the way entire populations chose death over surrender. At the time, she had thought they were simply too primitive to understand when they were beaten. Now she wondered if they had understood something her people didn't. What you're describing, she said slowly, it sounds like you think being human is better than being Valdorian. Jake shook his head. Not better, different. Your people are incredible. You've built wonders across the galaxy. You've mastered sciences we can't even imagine. You've created beauty and order on a scale that amazes me. Then what's wrong with how we live? You've forgotten that some things are more important than winning, and you've never learned that the strongest people are the ones who choose their own values and stick to them, no matter what. Saphira looked at Jake Martinez, this human who had nothing but somehow seemed richer than she was. For the first time in her life, she began to wonder if there might be another way to be strong, a way that didn't require taking from others, but instead came from something deep inside that could never be stolen or destroyed. And that thought terrified and excited her more than anything she had ever experienced. The weeks that followed changed everything for Lady Zephyra. Her conversations with Jake had opened her mind to ideas she had never considered, and she found herself looking at her world differently. The wealth and power that had once seemed so important now felt somehow empty. She began having more conversations with Jake, asking him about human history and philosophy. He told her about leaders who gave up power to do what was right, about people who chose to help others even when it cost them everything, about societies that valued truth and justice more than conquest. On Earth, Jake said one evening as they walked through the palace gardens, we had a leader named Washington who could have been king, but chose to step down after 8 years because he believed in democracy. That's foolish, Zephyra replied, though with less certainty than she once would have shown. Why give up power voluntarily? Because he understood that keeping power for its own sake corrupts people. He wanted to stay someone he could respect. Zephyra had been thinking about respect a lot lately. She realized that while many beings feared her and obeyed her, very few actually respected her. They followed her orders because they had to, not because they wanted to. But Jake respected her even though she was his captor. And slowly, she was beginning to respect him in return. The first real test of her changing perspective came during a meeting with other Valdorian nobles. Lord Vex was proposing a new campaign against a peaceful species called the Fenari, who possessed resources the Empire wanted. They have no military worth mentioning, Vex explained. We could conquer their system in weeks and enslave their population. The profits would be enormous. In the past, Zephyra would have eagerly joined such a campaign, but now she found herself asking questions that surprised the other nobles. What have the Fenari done to deserve conquest? She asked. Vex looked confused. Done? They exist. They have what we want, that's enough. But they've never attacked us. They've never threatened our people. Why not trade with them instead? Trade? Lord Vex laughed. Why trade when we can simply take what we want? Because, Zephyra said slowly, working out her thoughts as she spoke. Taking from others makes us dependent on conquest. What happens when there's no one left to conquer? The other nobles stared at her like she had grown. A second head. Lady Nara spoke first. Zephyra, are you feeling well? You sound like you're defending our enemies. I'm not defending anyone. I'm just wondering if there might be better ways to be strong. The meeting ended awkwardly, with the other nobles clearly worried about Zephyra's mental state. But she didn't care. For the first time in her life, she was thinking for herself instead of just following the traditions her people had always followed. The real change came a month later, during what should have been a routine execution. A human prisoner had been caught trying to steal food from the palace kitchens. The penalty was death, as it was for any theft by a slave. Zephyra stood on her platform, ready to give the order for execution, when she looked down at the prisoner. He was young, probably barely an adult, thin and desperate looking. Why did you steal? She asked, something she had never done before. The young human looked up at her with surprise. My sister is sick, she needed medicine, but I had no money. I thought if I could sell the food. In the past, Zephyra would have seen this as weakness and proceeded with the execution. But now, influenced by her conversations with Jake, she saw something different. She saw someone willing to risk his life for someone he loved. Bring this human sister to the palace medical center, she ordered. Have our doctors treat her illness. The crowd of nobles and servants watched. In shocked silence, Lord Vex stepped forward. My lady, the law is clear. Theft by a slave is punishable by death. I am changing the law, Zephyra said firmly, for this case. Later, Jake found her in her private chambers. She was sitting quietly, looking out the window. You saved that boy today, he said. I don't know why I did it. It goes against everything I was taught. Maybe you're learning that what you were taught isn't always right. Zephyra turned to look at him. Is this what you meant about choosing who you want to be? Part of it. You saw someone in need and chose to help instead of punish. That's who you decided to be in that moment. But the other nobles think I'm going soft. They're already plotting against me. Jake nodded. Doing the right thing often makes enemies. That's why most people don't do it. Are you saying I should expect to lose everything? I'm saying you have to decide what's more important, keeping power or keeping your soul. That night, Zephyra made a decision that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. She called Jake to her chambers and made him an offer that shocked them both. I want to set you free, she said. Jake stared at her. Why? Because keeping You as a slave was wrong. I can see that now. You're not property, you're a person, and people should be free to choose their own lives. What's the catch? Zephyra smiled sadly. No catch. I'll arrange transport back to human space. You can go home. Jake was quiet for a long time. Then he asked, "What will you do?" Try to become someone I can respect. Try to change things here, make them better. It won't be easy and I'll probably fail, but you'll stay true to who you want to be. Yes. Jake surprised her then. I'd like to stay. What? But you could be free. You could go home. I could. But I think you're going to need help changing things. And I've never walked away from someone who was trying to do the right thing. Zephyra felt tears in her eyes, something that hadn't happened since she was a child. You would stay here voluntarily? Even knowing how dangerous it will be? I'd stay as your friend and advisor, not as your slave. There's a big difference. Yes, Zephyra said, finally understanding what he meant. There is. In the months that followed, Zephyra began implementing changes in her territory. She freed many of her slaves, improved working conditions for her servants, and started trading fairly with neighboring systems instead of simply taking what she wanted. The other nobles were furious and did try to plot against her. But Jake's advice helped her outmaneuver them. More importantly, the beings in her territory began to truly support her instead of just obeying her out of fear. Her people became more loyal, her economy grew stronger through fair trade, and her military became more effective because her soldiers were fighting for ideals they believed in rather than just following orders. Jake had been right. True strength didn't come from taking from others. It came from being someone worth following. One evening, as they watched the sunset from the palace gardens, Zephyra asked Jake one more question. Do you think I'm becoming more human? Jake smiled. No. I think you're becoming more yourself, and that's better than being anything else. Lady Zephyra realized then that Jake Martinez hadn't just protected her from physical threats. He had saved her from something far worse, becoming a person she couldn't respect. And in teaching her about human strength, he had helped her discover her own. The pendant around his neck caught the light as they walked back toward the palace, two friends who had found something more valuable than all the treasures in the galaxy. The knowledge that some things could never be bought, sold, or stolen, only freely given and freely received.